Here's a polished, more engaging version of your scene in simple, conversational, emotional, and detailed style. The Oakary mansion shone like a jewel that evening. Chandeliers sparkled, casting golden light across the polished floors, and silk drapes swayed softly with the night breeze. Guests moved gracefully, dressed in bright Ankara gowns and flowing agbatas, laughter and chatter blending with the soft rhythm of distant drums. The air smelled of rich spices and roasted meats, mixed with the delicate scent of fresh flowers lining the long dining table. Every corner spoke of wealth, glittering silverware, crystal glasses and velvet cushions, but beneath the sparkle, there was a quiet tension. Kayamika walked in slowly, her simple wrapper and geli standing out against the sea of opulence. She felt every eye glance at her, some with curiosity, most with barely concealed disdain. She could hear whispers ripple through the room, words like "who invited her?" and "she doesn't belong here." As she stepped closer to the table, her heart thumped painfully, but she held her head high, gripping the small bag she carried as if it were a shield. Tonight, she was a stranger in a world that looked down on people like her. Yet something deep inside refused to bow, a quiet fire burning as the Oakarys celebrated their wealth around her. If you want, I can continue and rewrite all 15 scenes in this simple, emotional viral style, keeping each scene cinematic and detailed, so your script reaches full 4,000 words naturally. Do you want me to do that next? Here's a fully rewritten, engaging, emotional and detailed version of your second scene in simple conversational English. Kayamika slid into a seat at the long polished table, her hands folded neatly on her lap. Her wrapper was plain, her geli carefully tied but simple, nothing like the rich silks and bold colors that surrounded her. She felt every eye on her, the weight of their stares pressing like invisible hands. Some were curious, some amused, and some, she could tell, were openly judging her. Whispers floated through the room, soft but sharp, carrying words that cut deeper than any blade. "She doesn't belong here. Why is she even here?" "The poor girl." Kayamika tried to steady her breathing, reminding herself to stay calm, to keep her dignity. She felt small in the sea of wealth, the glinting silverware, crystal glasses and sparkling jewelry making her modest appearance stand out even more. Around her, laughter bubbled and conversations swirled like colorful smoke, yet she felt invisible and exposed all at once. Each fork clinking against fine china sounded louder than it should, each giggle sharper. Her stomach knotted, not from hunger, but from the sting of being looked down upon. Still, she forced a small smile, trying to appear polite, trying to be a part of a world that seemed determined to reject her. Deep down, though, a quiet fire burned in her chest, a sense that she did not truly belong. Not here yet, perhaps, but somewhere, someday. She adjusted her geli nervously and straightened her back, refusing to let the murmurs break her entirely. For now she would sit. For now she would endure. But even as the Oakary family laughed and whispered, Kayamika felt the first glimmer of strength rising, soft but unyielding, as though the room's very walls were whispering that this story was far from over. "If you want, I can rewrite scene 3, the cruel command," next in the same emotional viral style, keeping it detailed, cinematic, and converse. Here's a rewritten version of scene 3 in simple, emotional, and engaging conversational style. The clatter of silverware and soft laughter filled the air, but the warmth of the room never reached Kayamika. Halfway through the meal, a sharp, mocking voice cut through the chatter. One of the Oakary daughters leaned forward, her lips curled into a cruel smile. "This table is for people of class," she said, her words dripping with disdain. "Poor girls like you should sit with the staff." The words slammed into Kayamika like a cold gust of wind. A ripple of laughter followed, loud and cruel, bouncing off the chandeliers and polished walls, making her ears burn and her cheeks sting. Kayamika froze, her hands tightening on her lap. The silver spoon she held trembled slightly, though she tried to appear composed. Every eye turned toward her, some filled with smug amusement, others with curiosity, but none with kindness. Her stomach twisted as whispers swirled around her like dark clouds. "She's so shameless. How dare she sit here? The poor girl thinks she belongs." She felt the weight of their judgment pressing down, heavy and suffocating. For a moment she wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor beneath her polished chair, to escape the shame. But even in the humiliation, something inside her stirred, a quiet, burning fire that refused to be extinguished. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and took a slow breath, willing herself not to cry, not to show how much the words hurt. She noticed the sparkle of the chandeliers above, the delicate pattern of the fine china, and thought, this table, maybe it isn't theirs to claim. The laughter and sneers continued, but behind the fear and shame, a small seed of strength began to grow. She would not be broken tonight. Somehow she would rise above their mockery, even if no one in the room believed she could. If you like, I can now rewrite scene 4, The Walk of Shame, next in the same emotional viral style. Here's a rewritten version of scene 4 in simple, emotional, engaging, and cinematic style. Kayamika felt her heart hammering as the cruel laughter echoed in her ears. Slowly, almost painfully, she stood up, her hands trembling at her sides. Her eyes stung, and she could feel the sharp edge of tears threatening to fall, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Every head turned toward her, every glance full of mockery, curiosity, or disdain. It felt like the room itself was holding its breath, watching her humiliation like a cruel show. Her bare feet brushed softly against the cool, polished floor as she walked toward the servants' corner, each step heavy with shame and anger that fought for control inside her. The rich smell of roasted meats and spiced sauces seemed to mock her hunger, the laughter of the guests ringing sharper with each step. She could hear whispers, some cruel, some shocked, all focused on her, like arrows aimed straight at her heart. Why did they have to be so cruel? She thought, swallowing hard to keep herself steady. Despite the humiliation, something deep inside refused to break. She lifted her chin slightly, drawing in a slow breath, and felt a spark of defiance flicker within her. They could laugh. They could mock. But she would not shrink entirely. Her gelly, slightly disheveled from the tension, felt like a small crown she could hold on to. A reminder that she was still herself even if the world around her had turned cruel. As she reached the far end of the room, near where the servants quietly watched, she lowered herself onto a small wooden chair, her body shaking slightly from the fear, shame, and quiet rage boiling inside. Around her, the rich laughter continued, but Kayamika felt a strange clarity settle in her chest. Tonight, they may have thought they had power over her. But power could change hands in a single moment, she realized, and when that time came, they would see that the girl they mocked was Fa. Here's a rewritten version of scene 5 in simple, emotional, and engaging style. The laughter and whispers froze suddenly as the tall doors of the dining hall opened. An elderly man stepped in, his step slow but deliberate, carrying a worn leather briefcase in one hand. His silver hair caught the light from the chandeliers, and his dark suit was crisp and precise, every detail speaking of authority and purpose. The room fell into a hush, as if the air itself had paused to watch him. Even the Okuri family, proud and confident just moments ago, looked up with surprise and unease. The lawyer's eyes scanned the room briefly, then landed on Kayamika. A faint smile touched his lips, warm but commanding. He bowed slightly, a gesture of respect, before straightening and walking toward her with measured steps. Each footfall seemed to echo, cutting through the tension like a quiet drumbeat. Kayamika felt her heart race, unsure if this was another humiliation or something entirely different. The chatter of the guests had disappeared, replaced by the soft scrape of his shoes on the polished floor and the rapid beating of her own heart. He stopped in front of her, placed the briefcase gently on the table, and opened it with care, producing papers that seemed ordinary but carried an invisible weight. His eyes met hers, steady and kind, as if he could see through the fear and doubt that had clouded her since she arrived. "Miss Kayamika," he said in a calm, firm voice, the kind that demanded attention without raising it, "we are here to finalize an important matter regarding your late uncle's estate." The words hung in the air, heavy with promise. For the first time that night, Kayamika felt a flicker of hope mixed with her fear. The guests exchanged confused glances, whispers rising uncertainly, sensing that something significant was about to unfold. She straightened in her seat, her trembling hands gripping the edges of the table. Somehow she knew, though she couldn't yet. Here's a rewritten version of scene 6 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. The lawyer looked at Kayamika with steady eyes, his voice calm but carrying a weight that made the room fall utterly silent. "Miss Kayamika," he said, opening the folder carefully, "we are here to finalize the transfer of ownership. As of today, this estate, including this very house, belongs to you." The words landed like thunder. For a moment no one moved. The guests froze mid-laugh, forks suspended in the air, and the air seemed to thicken with disbelief. Then a gasp rippled across the dining hall, sharp and incredulous. Eyes widened, mouths fell open, and the proud faces of the Okuri family drained of color. Kayamika's heart pounded, her palms sweaty, but she sat still, stunned, trying to let the weight of what she was hearing sink in. Whispers and murmurs spread like wildfire. "What, how?" someone stammered. Others exchanged glances, panic and confusion flashing across their faces. The daughter who had mocked her moments ago stepped back, her painted smile gone, replaced by shock and fear. Kayamika felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and a quiet thrill she hadn't expected. The lawyer continued, speaking slowly so every word could be heard. "Your late uncle, Chief Nadazi, left this estate to you in full, bypassing all others who might have claimed it. He made it clear that you, Kayamika, are the rightful owner of everything in this house, from the walls around you to the grounds outside." Kayamika's hands gripped the edge of the polished table, knuckles white. The room seemed to spin for a second, then she exhaled slowly, trying to steady herself. She realized that all the shame, the whispers, the laughter, it had all been temporary, powerless against what was hers by right. The fire inside her flared, warm and bright. She looked around at the stunned faces, their arrogance replaced by fear, and felt the first taste of power and justice. Tonight the GI. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 7 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. The room seemed to tilt for the Okuri family as the weight of the announcement sank in. The same voices that had mocked Kayamika, that had whispered cruel jokes and laughed at her, now went silent. Forks clattered to the floor, glasses wobbled in hands that tightened around them, and painted smiles froze mid-expression, vanishing entirely. Eyes widened in disbelief, jaws clenched, and a heavy tension filled the air, sharp enough to cut through the sparkle of chandeliers and fine china. Kayamika sat quietly, feeling the hum of power shift around her. The woman they had called poor, the girl they had deemed unworthy of the table, now owned everything: the house, the estate, the legacy their father had left behind. Whispers started again, this time edged with panic. "It can't be. How?" One of the daughters stammered, her voice shaky. Others looked at each other, fear and confusion etched deep into their faces. Pride, arrogance, and entitlement had crumbled in an instant. The hall, once alive with laughter and self-importance, now felt cold and hollow, the Okuri's glances darting nervously, unable to meet Kayamika's calm, steady eyes. Every luxurious detail of the room, the glittering silverware, the ornate chandeliers, the velvet chairs, suddenly seemed less theirs and more a backdrop to a truth they had ignored for too long. Kayamika could see it in their faces: shock, regret, fear, and the faint glimmer of understanding that their cruelty had been misplaced, and the power they had assumed over her had vanished in a single, undeniable moment. She straightened in her chair, adjusting her simple geli with quiet dignity. Her lips curved in the faintest, almost imperceptible smile, not of malice but of triumph. For the first time that night, she felt the world shift beneath her feet, not with vengeance, but with the undeniable justice that comes from patience, endurance, and quiet. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 8 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. The lawyer cleared his throat and opened the papers with careful, deliberate hands. "Kayamika," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "your late uncle, Chief Nadazi, made a decision long before today. He knew the hearts of those around him. He knew who would care for this estate with honor, and who only sought wealth for themselves." Kayamika's eyes widened as she listened, her heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and anticipation. The room held its breath. The same people who had laughed at her, mocked her, and dismissed her now leaned forward involuntarily, their curiosity and fear palpable. The lawyer continued, "Chief Nadazi secretly made you the sole heir to his estate. He bypassed his own children, who, truth be told, were more interested in gold, in possessions, in appearances than in responsibility, respect, or family legacy." A faint murmur ran through the room, faces twisted with shock, shame, and a growing realization of their own greed. Some covered their mouths, unable to speak. Others just stared at Kayamika, eyes wide and guilty. Kayamika felt a strange wave of emotions wash over her. Relief, vindication, a quiet simmering joy. She had endured humiliation, whispers, and mockery, and yet here she sat, holding a truth no one had expected. The girl they had treated as nothing now carried the legacy of a chief, a man wise enough to see her worth when others could not. The lawyer closed the folder gently and looked at her, eyes kind, This estate, every room, every brick, every treasure within it, has been entrusted to you. Chief Nadazi believed in your strength, your patience, and your character. He knew that the house and all it represents would be safe in your hands. Kayamika's hands rested lightly on the table. She lifted her gaze, meeting the stunned faces of the Okuri family. Pride, arrogance, and entitlement had no place here. Only quiet J. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 9 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. Kayamika sat up slowly, feeling a shift inside her. The trembling that had gripped her since she arrived at the table began to fade, replaced by a calm, steady strength. Her shoulders straightened, her back lifted, and the quiet fire in her chest grew brighter, warming her from the inside out. She adjusted her geli carefully, smoothing the folds with deliberate care, as if each movement were a statement. She was no longer the timid, humiliated girl from earlier. Her eyes swept across the room, taking in the stunned faces of the Okuri family. The daughters who had laughed at her, the sons who had whispered cruel jokes. They all stared, mouths slightly open, unable to look away. The power dynamic had shifted, almost imperceptibly at first, then clearly, and Kayamika could feel it. She did not need to speak yet. Her calm presence said enough. Every detail of her modest attire, the simple wrapper, the carefully tied geli, now carried an elegance that no wealth could buy. Her dignity was visible, radiant, and unshakable. The room that had once felt suffocating now seemed to shrink around her, their arrogance and entitlement making them smaller in comparison to the quiet strength she radiated. She could see the confusion, the fear, the dawning realization on their faces. They had underestimated her, mocked her, and assumed her meekness meant weakness, but they were wrong. She had endured their cruelty, their laughter, their whispers, and yet she had emerged stronger, calmer, and more composed than they could ever imagine. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on her lips. Not cruel, not mocking, but satisfied, confident. She no longer needed their approval or their pity. For the first time she felt fully in control, the rightful owner of her uncle's legacy and of her own story. In that moment, Kayamika transformed from the girl they had tried to humiliate into a woman who commanded. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 10 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. The sudden change in the room was almost dizzying. Just moments ago, the Okuri family had laughed, sneered, and whispered cruelly about her, and now their voices trembled with desperation. "Sister, forgive us, we were only joking, please let us stay." One of the daughters stammered, her voice shaking, eyes wide and pleading. Another added quickly, "We didn't mean it, we didn't know." Their words filled the room, but they sounded empty, hollow, lacking the sincerity they so desperately hoped would win her favor. Kayamika sat still, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Part of her wanted to rise and scold them, to let every word of their cruelty and mockery crash back onto their heads. Another part of her felt the faintest twinge of pity, remembering how fear and greed could twist people into shadows of themselves. She adjusted her geli again, her hands steady now, her posture calm, a quiet fire of dignity burning in her chest. The family shifted uneasily, glancing at one another, as if expecting her to immediately forgive and forget. But forgiveness could not erase the humiliation they had caused, nor the truth that had now been revealed. Kayamika's eyes swept over them, calm and unflinching. Their desperation was almost pathetic, a mirror to the arrogance they had displayed only minutes before. Every painted smile, every forced word of apology, revealed their guilt and their helplessness in the face of a power they had never truly understood. For a moment, silence hung in the air, broken only by the faint clinking of a fork someone had dropped in their nervousness. Kayamika felt the full weight of the room's attention, and instead of shrinking from it, she leaned slightly forward, steady, composed, unafraid. These were the same voices that had mocked her, the same hands that had turned away in disdain, and now, finally, they were forced to face her strength. She did not end. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 11 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. Kayamika took a slow, steady breath and lifted her gaze to meet the eyes of the family who had mocked her. Her posture was calm, her shoulders squared, and her hands rested lightly in her lap. Her wrapper, simple but elegant, and her carefully tied geli glowed softly under the chandelier light, giving her an air of quiet authority. The room was still, every heartbeat seemingly echoing in the tense silence. Her voice, soft but clear, cut through the thick tension. "You asked me to leave the table because I was poor. she said, each word measured, deliberate. But this table belongs to me. She let the pause linger, letting the weight of her words sink in, watching as disbelief and guilt crossed their faces. And you, she continued, have shown me your true hearts. The room shifted. The daughters who had sneered, the sons who had whispered cruelly, all shrank slightly under the force of her calm, measured words. Their arrogance crumbled, replaced with shame and regret. They had tried to humiliate her, to push her out, but she now sat like a queen in the place they had once deemed beyond her reach. Her dignity, patience, and quiet strength filled the space more fully than any wealth or ornament could. Kayamika's gaze swept over each one of them, unwavering and clear, yet not cruel. There was no bitterness, only the quiet power of truth and justice. She had endured their mockery, their whispers and their laughter, and now she spoke with a calm authority that no one could challenge. The very air seemed to hum with the shift. She was no longer the girl they had dismissed. She was the rightful owner of the house, the estate, and her own story, and they were forced to witness her ascend with nothing but the strength of her patience, courage, and unshakable dignity. In that moment, the silence of the room became a testament to her triumph. Kayamika, the girl they thought they could. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 12 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. Kayamika stood slowly, her eyes sweeping over the room, then softened as she looked at the staff who had worked quietly in the shadows all evening, the cooks who had prepared the lavish meal, the cleaners who had polished every surface, and the guards who had kept watch without complaint. A gentle smile touched her lips. "Please," she said, her voice warm and calm, "join me at the table. Tonight you eat as equals, for this is your house too." For a moment the staff froze, unsure if they had heard correctly. Then, as realization dawned, their faces lit up with astonishment and joy. One by one they stepped forward, hesitant at first, but soon laughing softly, their movements freer, lighter, as if a weight they had carried all their lives had been lifted. Kayamika guided them to the seats, ensuring each had a place of honor, the polished table suddenly feeling less like a stage of judgment and more like a circle of shared celebration. Laughter began to ripple through the hall, not the cruel, mocking laughter of the Okeries, but genuine warm laughter that danced through the air like sunlight. The cooks, once unseen behind steaming pots, told jokes and shared stories. The cleaners, who had silently moved through the room, now smiled, their eyes bright with pride. The guards, stoic all evening, relaxed and joined in, their voices blending with the music that now felt alive with happiness. Kayamika sat among them, her heart swelling with a quiet joy she had never felt before. The room had changed completely. The chandeliers still sparkled, the silverware still gleamed, but now it was not wealth alone that filled the space. It was respect, laughter, and belonging. For the first time that evening the house felt truly alive. She looked at the Okery family, who had shrunk to the edges, silent and powerless. Their world had been upended, and yet, Kayamika felt no hatred. She had Rakel. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 13 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. The Okery family sank into their chairs at the far end of the hall, their faces pale and eyes wide with a mix of shock, shame, and disbelief. For the first time that night, they were powerless, forced to watch a scene they could neither control nor undo. The very people they had looked down upon, ignored, and treated as lesser were now laughing, chatting, and sharing the meal they had once thought belonged only to the wealthy. Kayamika moved among the staff, handing a plate here, offering a glass there, her presence calm and luminous. The cooks, cleaners, and guards smiled freely, their voices rising in warm laughter that filled the grand hall. Music seemed to echo brighter, richer, as if the room itself was celebrating this long-overdue reversal of fortune. The sparkling chandeliers, the polished silverware, and the rich aroma of roasted meats all seemed to belong not to wealth or status, but to the joy of those who had been overlooked and undervalued for too long. The Okeries could only sit and watch, their arrogance and pride reduced to a quiet, heavy tension. No words came easily, no gestures could undo what had happened. Every glance at Kayamika reminded them of the truth they had ignored. She was the rightful owner of the house, the estate, and the legacy they had so carelessly assumed was theirs. The power they had flaunted for generations had shifted, and the weight of their own misjudgment pressed on them like a stone in their chests. Kayamika caught their eyes for a brief moment, not with anger, but with calm dignity. She had no need to gloat. The simple act of letting the staff enjoy the feast, of showing kindness where cruelty had once lived, spoke louder than any words. Tonight the house had been reclaimed, not with revenge but with grace. The family that had once looked down upon others now sat in silence, witnessing the quiet triumph of a girl they had under. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 14 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. Kayamika walked slowly through the grand halls of the mansion, her fingers brushing lightly over the carved wooden doors, tracing the intricate patterns that had once seemed so distant and unwelcoming. Every corner she passed, the sweeping staircase, the gleaming floors, the chandeliers that hung like frozen stars, felt different now. She no longer saw a place of judgment or mockery. This house, with all its opulence and grandeur, had become hers. It was not just a building of wealth, it was a symbol of destiny fulfilled, of patience rewarded, and of the quiet strength she had carried within her all along. The memories of laughter that had mocked her earlier seemed almost unreal as she moved from room to room. Each space whispered of her uncle's wisdom and foresight, of a legacy preserved for someone who truly deserved it. Kayamika's heart swelled with a mix of awe, pride, and a quiet joy she had never known. The sunlight streaming through the tall windows seemed to celebrate her arrival, glinting off the polished floors and casting golden patterns that danced like a promise of new beginnings. She paused in the main hall, taking a deep breath, feeling the weight of every wall, every carved banister, every delicate fixture. For years, this house had been a symbol of something she thought she could never touch, a reminder of the worlds that had looked down on her. But now, with calm certainty, she realized it belonged to her, not just as property, but as a testament to who she was. The mansion no longer intimidated, it embraced her. Kayamika lifted her chin and smiled softly, adjusting her geli as she looked around. Each room, each hallway, each echo of the past now spoke to her of hope, resilience, and justice. She had reclaimed more than a house. She had reclaimed her dignity, her power, and her place in the world. And as she walked further, feeling the smoothness of the polish. Here's a rewritten version of Scene 15 in simple, emotional, and cinematic style. By the next morning, news of what had happened at the Okuri mansion spread across Okunda like wildfire. People whispered on the streets, in markets, and at offices. The girl everyone had called poor, the one laughed at and humiliated at a grand dinner, was in fact the true owner of the house and estate. Stories of Kayamika's calm strength, her quiet patience, and the way she had reclaimed everything without anger traveled faster than anyone could imagine. Everyone who had witnessed the event, even from a distance, spoke of her with awe. The staff who had once served silently now told tales of how she had invited them to the table, turning humiliation into celebration. People admired how she had carried herself, not with cruelty but with dignity, grace, and quiet justice. Mothers told their daughters to remember her name, and young men and women dreamed of growing up with even a fraction of her courage. Kayamika became more than a woman who inherited wealth. She became a symbol, a legend of patience, intelligence, and quiet strength. The mansion, once a place of mockery and power for the proud, now echoed her story in every room, every hallway, every polished surface. In Okunda, her name was spoken with respect, and her story reminded everyone that true strength was not in wealth alone, but in dignity, resilience, and the courage to rise above those who tried to belittle you. Kayamika had turned ridicule into triumph, and her legend would live on far longer than the laughter of those who had once looked down on her. This completes all 15 scenes rewritten in a simple, emotional, viral, and cinematic style, ready for a full 4,000-word script. If you want, I can combine all 15 scenes into a single flowing 4,000-word script, fully polished and ready for production or storytelling. Do you want me to do that next?